If there's anyone's statement which sums up the spirit of UC Gundam, it would be, and then it got worse. From the 1-year war to Stardust, Stardust to the Grips conflict, and then the Grips conflict to the first, second, and third Neo-Zeon War, things always get worse for the Universal Century. Sure, there are those who offer small slivers of hope, be it Maneva or Char at one point. However, victory always looms in the distance. Victory and Mad Wang. Whatever hope they offered, if it didn't come crashing down already, does so eventually. UC Gundam gets and is all around pretty grim. Nobody wins, everyone dies, and the Turn A comes out of nowhere to blow up your plumbing. Having said that, the Universal Century did at one point have a real chance at things working out, a chance which was blown by one man's cock. Twice. Yes, I know what I said. Yes, I'm completely serious, and no, it probably isn't who you're thinking. Hello everyone, I'm BooFire191, and welcome to Nobody Understands UC Gundam. To understand what I'm getting at, we need to dive headfirst into a Gundam side story manga known as Char's Deleted Affair, Portrait of a Young Red Comet. Naturally, spoilers are abound, so if you're interested in giving it a read, click off now. Honestly, though there are some interesting bits, the work as a whole is rather slow and a bit dull. Watching this before experiencing it for yourself won't impact your enjoyment all that much. Everything that happens other than the very end, which I'll be going over, is telegraphed way in advance, and what isn't is often easy to predict, sans one particular moment. For all intents and purposes, Char's Deleted Affair marks the moment where one of mankind's best shots at a better future is turned to ash, while another is pushed to the edge. Now, as the name would imply, as well as the cover, the manga is centered around Char's relationship with Haman Karn, and a romantic relationship the Red Comet has with a one Natalie Bianchi. Probably messed up that last name. Despite outward appearances, the titular Deleted Affair is not Char and Haman, but rather Char and Natalie. Just wanted to clear that up for those who've watched Zeta but haven't read the manga, since that runs kinda contrary to what we're told in the show. Don't worry, the manga has this change make sense in context. When the story kicks off, Haman has an admiration for Char, which quickly turns into a crush. A part of this stems from the, then, young girl looking to Char as a symbol of hope in regards to her nature as a new type. However, this disposition is also reinforced by the Red Comet's looks. The man slays, often leading to disastrous results. As the manga progresses, however, this crush develops into something a bit more profound, and later, a bit obsessive. Because of events I won't go too much into detail here, a small group of Federation ships and mobile suits discovers Axis. They attack the asteroid space station, which leads to a fight that Haman ultimately joins in on. In the midst of said fight, however, the young new type is almost killed, but Char manages to save her in the nick of time. What's important about this moment is that it paves the way for who Haman ultimately becomes. Not only does it sow the seeds for the manga's rather tragic ending, but it establishes that Haman is a charismatic leader with a heroic heart. She's, as crazy as it sounds, a good person who wants to do right by her people. It's a fact that is reestablished constantly throughout the story, a fact which ties back into Double Zeta during Judao's final battle with Haman. However, the young girl is precisely that, a young girl. Despite her strength, she is incredibly fragile emotionally. This is a trait which Char shares with Haman, emotional fragility. He's very much a guy, not a little girl, and is something he's grappling with over the course of the manga. Right from the outset, the Red Comet does some soul-searching with the aid of Lala after landing the greatest headshot of all time. It's debatable. He wonders if he can truly change, and if there's any kindness left within his heart. Over the course of the story, this is expanded upon, as individuals like Maharaja Karn place their hope for Zeon's future onto Char's shoulders. They want him to become the man they believe he is meant to become a leader, to become Casfeld Daikun. Essentially, Char's Deleted Affair sees the rather cold titular character become a more heroic figure, paving the way for Zeta Gundam's Quattro Bagina. As this is going on, however, Char meets Natalie Bianchi, and slowly but surely, they develop a relationship which ultimately becomes romantic. Over the course of the story, Haman and Char walk parallel journeys. Both of them are forced to grow and change as they develop into truly great leaders, something the Universal Century is sorely lacking. On top of that, both of these individuals are forced to confront feelings and emotions neither of them can really handle but work through regardless. For a while, the pair truly embody what it means to be a new type. They work to understand both those they encounter and themselves. As one would assume, the positive growth of these two characters doesn't go unchallenged. The pro-war faction at Axis is ultimately what throws everything into chaos. Long story short, a group of Zeon remnants who wanted to continue the fight against the Federation show up at Axis and proceed to plot behind the scenes. Their aim is to bring the asteroid space station into conflict with the Federation so that the war can continue. Their scheming leads to a lot of different outcomes, most of which really don't matter. However, the few that do involve the death of Haman's father and this motherfucker, Fabian Frisnak, however you say that, aka the guy who ruined everything. So, to abridge a rather meandering story, Fabian is a part of the pro-war faction and is tasked with seducing Haman, the now symbol or figurehead of Axis, and winning her over to their side. The idea being that if they can sink their claws into her, she can sway the people into being pro-war. Once more, Haman and Char have a parallel in this regard. Natalie, essentially against her will, is tasked with doing the same thing as Fabian, but to Char, by the leader of the pro-war faction. Unlike Fabian, however, Natalie hates what she is doing and only does so out of a sense of fear and obligation. Essentially, the leader of the pro-war faction noticed the budding relationship and attempted to use it for his own gain. Throughout the manga, Fabian is rather suave and comes across like a space knight. He's also a talented pilot who looks like Fabio. What I'm trying to say here is that he's got a lot going for him, and his mission progresses rather smoothly, with Haman being receptive to his advances. But then he screws everything up. Almost literally. Early on in the manga, Maharaja Karn sends Haman and Char to Side 3 with the intent of springing the Red Comet into action, to show him the Federation's post-war injustices and hasten Char's transition into a great leader. This results in the pair encountering Fabian before eventually landing on Side 3, where a decent portion of the story unfolds. Toward the tail end of their stay, however, things get wacky, to say the least. During a trip to a Zeon museum, Haman accidentally peers into Char's mind and sees dormant memories the Red Comet still has trouble coming to terms with, memories of his sister. Haman tells him this, leading to an altercation which leaves the young girl in tears. Following the pair's fight, Roberto warns Char, via an encrypted message, that Maharaja Karn is dying and that a power vacuum is forming on Axis. This prompts the Red Comet into cutting these Side 3 trips short, but not before Natalie attempts to seduce Char at Fabian's behest. This goes unexpectedly well, as Char pieces things together, leading to Natalie coming clean. Despite the lies, the pair end up hooking up and spending the night with one another. This unto itself is not a bad thing. In fact, it demonstrates Char's willingness to open up and trust others again in a way he hadn't been able to in a very long time. Despite his previous outburst, a relapse back into bad behavior, Char has truly grown into a stronger and possibly better man, if his actions following this moment are anything to go by. As Natalie and Char spend time with one another, however, Fabian uses this opportunity to get close to Haman. He takes the young girl out on a date and they have a genuinely good time. Happy Haman is truly a sight to behold. In spite of that, however, this isn't enough for the Fabio-looking motherfucker. He takes Haman back to his room where the pair talk. The young girl reveals her complex yet intense emotions for the Red Comet, prompting Fabian to say he'll make her forget about Char. Though the exchange immediately following this is a bit cute, with Haman playfully brushing that notion aside and Fabian leaning in for a kiss, things get out of hand fast. Instead of pulling back and taking things from there, Fabian attempts to undress Haman despite her pretty blunt and blatant protests. There's no sugarcoating it. Fabian, in the heat of the moment, attempts to rape Haman, leaving lasting damage on the young girl's psyche. Damage we actually see on full display in Zeta Gundam when Camille attempts to establish a new type connection with Haman. Because it was forced upon her, and it didn't happen naturally like the one with Judao in Double Zeta, Haman pretty quickly and harshly stops that dead in its tracks. What I'm attempting to get at here is that this one moment, brought on by Fabian's uncontrollable libido, sets the stage for a rather charming, heroic, and sweet young girl growing into a cold and villainous young woman. Immediately following the attempted rape, Char essentially kicks Fabian out of the Zeon military and makes a beeline for Axis. As they make their return, however, the Red Comet is faced with a new dilemma. The pro-war faction has initiated a coup and is attempting to overthrow and purge Maharaja's more moderate faction. This leads to an armed conflict which sees Char and Haman both step up to the plate as they demonstrate how far they've come. Despite the lies and manipulation, as well as her final encounter with Fabian, Haman is left slightly shaken but undeterred. Her heart may have hardened, but she isn't broken. The same heroic spirit shown off at the start of the manga is still very much present as she takes the fight to the pro-war faction, all in a desperate bid to save her father. Though she is able to liberate the place she calls home and stops the pro-war faction, Haman ultimately fails in what she sets out to do. After a ceasefire which sees an end to the fighting, the young girl rushes to her father's side, only to see he was already dead. This fractures something in the still rather fragile Haman. However, she still remains the same person she's been throughout the story, albeit barely. Then, after her crowning ceremony, for lack of a better term, it happens. Haman finally breaks. Natalie brings the young girl into a room and reveals she's pregnant with Char's child. After everything that had happened, Haman's feelings for the Red Comet had become even more intense, which results in an emotional outburst. Then, like an idiot, Natalie confesses that the child was conceived the night Fabian attempted to rape Haman. The young girl's outburst then ramps up to 11 as she asks, or rather declares, that the friendship the pair had was nothing more than a lie. Just like the relationship with Fabian, it was a plot to manipulate her. Soon after, Haman storms out of the room before noticing a man who wants to do Natalie harm. In her heartbroken state, the young woman leaves him be, but quickly regrets this decision after hearing a gunshot, prompting her to call for help. This is ultimately in vain, however, as Natalie and her unborn child die. This is something that shakes Char to his very core, something which, along with Lala's death and Camille's fate at the end of Zeta, sets the stage for Char's counterattack. Though the crack in the Red Comet's development is nowhere near as bad as Haman's, it is still very much present, as seen with Char's emerging doubts in Maharaja's ideals for a bloodless Zeon independence movement. Over time, Char grows to hate Haman due to what happened with Natalie. This prompts the Red Comet into putting together a mission bound for the Earth Sphere. Though she protests, Haman, begrudgingly, gives said mission her blessing. By the end of the manga, the groundwork for Ayuk is established, as Haman is left to stew in the heartache and loneliness brought on by that fateful night. As Char leaves, whatever was left of Haman's heroic heart dies and turns cold. To put things in perspective, if Fabian didn't try to rape Haman, Haman herself would have been distraught come her father's death, but be nowhere near as unstable during Natalie's confession. She wouldn't have had the baggage of everything Fabian did to her, and wouldn't have projected the feelings associated with that night onto Natalie. Though she still would have been heartbroken, Haman wouldn't have been bitter enough to let someone she viewed as a sister die out of jealousy. As seen here, the young woman had intense feelings for Char, but was willing to give others a chance. She wasn't obsessively clingy. That didn't develop until after the rape attempt. If Fabian didn't do what he did, Haman's heart would have hardened in the wake of her father's death, but not break. The heroic and inspirational spirit shown throughout the manga would have persisted, and she would have grown into a leader who, quite possibly, embodied the ideals of her father, especially if Char stayed at Axis. Going along with that, if Haman never let Natalie die, the risk Char took letting another person into his life would have paid off. He'd have someone to provide him emotional support and a child of his own. His future would be a bright one, as the hope in Maharaja's ideals persists far stronger than it does in actual UC. If the Dakar speech and the events of Zeta are anything to go by, Char would have become Casville Daikun once more. He would have become a leader who sought to alter humanity's downward spiral through understanding, instead of being a hopeless maniac who was a shadow of his former self. Basically, Char's counterattack would have been averted, and the glimmer of hope Char represented in Zeta would have come to fruition. Without Hamon's aid, without Fabian doing what he did, Stardust may have very well been averted. Without Stardust, there'd be no Titans, no Grips conflict, billions of lives, because, holy cow, Grips was bloody, wouldn't have been needlessly wasted. But if Stardust still came to fruition because Delaz and the Grips conflict still unfolded, there'd certainly be no first, second, and third Neo-Zeon War, at least not in the same way as actual UC. Assuming, of course, Ayuk doesn't manage to change the Federation for the better with Axis's aid, there'd only really be one war, with two of mankind's greatest at the helm. If Fabian didn't try to get his end wet, the promise and hope Zeon represented before the start of the 1-year war would have had a real chance at being realized and making the Universal Century a better place. But, having said that, I've been Bufar191. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see all you guys next time. Goodbye.